Today we're continuing the series Masters of the Craft, where Brian sits down with people really that not only are inspiring to talk to, but also are truly masters of what they do. This week's episode is with Claire Keane. For the folks that don't know Claire Keane, Brian, can you kind of set up, well, not only know how you know Claire, but also kind of the work that people have seen her do?
I actually first met Claire at Disney when I was working there on something. She's an illustrator who does children's books, some amazing children's books. She writes and illustrates them, and also sometimes just illustrates them. A lot of film stuff, Disney visual development stuff. Just beautiful work. Her work on Tangled is amazing. Couldn't be better at what she does. Her work is incredible. Her mind is incredible. She is a joy for me to talk to, and again, a person I feel very lucky to know. Just couldn't be a sweeter human being.
Anything we should look for that really stood out to you with your interview with Claire?
Yeah, she had some interesting things to say about creativity. She talks about a plant. You'll see. I really found that intriguing. I thought about it a lot since. We did her interview a while ago, but I thought about it a lot since. Anyway, yeah, I think that's a good one to look for, but don't just look for that because there's gold all over the place with her. So pay close attention.
Hello and welcome to You Are a Storyteller, Masters of the Craft, a conversational series hosted by author and filmmaker Brian McDonald. In this episode, Brian is joined by visual development artist and illustrator Claire Keane, whose work is showcased in the beloved films Frozen, Wreck-It Ralph, Tangled, and Enchanted. In addition to illustrating a number of children's books, Claire is also the author and illustrator of the children's books Once Upon a Cloud and Little Big Girl. In the episode, Brian and Claire chat about the power of curiosity, how creatives develop consistent personal styles, and how she uses her own experiences and observations of the people around her to develop the character of Rapunzel.
Now, I know that you have drawn forever, right? You've been an artist since essentially the day you were born. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My parents said that the first drawing that I did was when I was 18 months old.
18 months old?
Yeah, and that it was of my mom, and it was upside down, and I gave her a little pig nose and earrings.
I heard this story. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, so you drew right away, and your dad told me that you didn't talk for a while.
Yeah.
Like that you could draw.
Yeah, and so I couldn't really talk until I was 4. And they said that it was because those lines got switched. Like at 18 months, normally a kid starts talking. But I started drawing, and so it kind of switched. And they said that like when I was 4, I kind of, when I started talking more, then I kind of stopped drawing as much.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
But, it's interesting because I notice it too. Like when I'm working, like I can't hold a conversation when I'm drawing.
Really?
No. I mean, I think that's probably a lot of people are like that. And, but I think it must be like 2 different parts of the brain. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I haven't really studied it at all, but, yeah, I can listen. I can listen to a podcast or a book and get really into those while I'm drawing. Not writing though.
Sure. Well, that's
That's
yeah. That's a different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder about this genetic component because it goes back in your family quite a bit. This artist thing, right? So did I hear that even maybe your grandfather was a cartoonist of some significance, mm-hmm. right? Did your great grandfather
When my granddad was really old, I asked him, I said, "Granddad, did your dad draw?" And he was like, "Yeah, but he was a different type of drawer." I was like, "Oh, like how?" And he was like, "Well, he designed machine parts, like train parts." I was like, "What? That's crazy."
That is crazy.
Like, it is. And in his mind, he wasn't like equating it as something, but I'm like, at that time,
yeah,
probably the type of job that an artist could get.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, that's amazing to me, right? So do you think there's a genetic component, or do you think you do?
No, I do, because before I had kids, I thought that it was just kind of watching my parents or my dad and my granddad draw and like somehow being inspired by that. But watching my kids when they were babies, and like I didn't have time to draw in front of my kids. Like I would do that when the kids were with the nanny, and when I was with the kids, they were like on me and just like needing me. And so I wasn't drawing in front of them, but both of them are just obsessed with drawing. Like they're really, really good at it. And the teachers would, their teachers would comment on like, oh, Matisse is very, very good at drawing, or like she really enjoys drawing. She loves drawing a lot. And they would say that without knowing that I was an artist in any way.
Right.
And they would say the same thing about Roman, and they're both known as the artists in their class.
Really?
Yeah. And so I think that I don't know.
And your brother's also an artist, right?
Yeah, my brother, and so is my cousin.
Right.
And I don't know if it's really like the talent that gets passed down, but I think that it's the desire and like the enjoyment.
Okay.
Of doing that, like I can enjoy it. My kids can enjoy it. Somebody else might try it, and like I see other kids in the class, and they really don't enjoy drawing as much as my kids do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like we all have our different things that we gravitate towards, and I think that is what is genetic in a way.
Sure. I was at the San Diego Comic-Con. This was years ago. And a friend of mine had a booth, this guy named Dan Brereton. And Dan had done a lot of Batman stuff and a lot of monster stuff. He does a lot of monster stuff, but he had done some Batman things. And so I was talking to Dan. I was at his booth. But he had a lot of fans, and so you'd have to wait, and then you'd get back in, Anyway, so this fan came up, and he had an accent, which at the time I couldn't quite peg. He was kind of quiet and shy. And he said to my friend Dan, I'd like to show you something. Dan said, okay. So this guy pulls out this bust of Batman, and it was gorgeous. It stopped the show. It was like you could hear a pin drop at the San Diego Comic-Con, right? You could hear a pin drop. It was gorgeous. It felt like just a classical like sculpture that like it was crazy. And I was standing next to this older guy, and everybody was talking. I said something like, "Hey, this is pretty good." And the guy said, "Okay." The older guy, "It's okay." It's like, "He's my son." Oh, first he said he's my son. I go, "He's pretty good." He goes, "He's okay." I go, "I think that's really good." He goes, "It's all right." And I said, "Really?" And he says, "Well, I'm a sculptor too." He said, "My family, we've been sculptors in Italy for generations." I was like, that's interesting, because I think everybody could see that in that one sculpture. I think everybody could see all the lessons throughout and when somebody from Italy says we've done it for generations, they don't mean 3, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I really do think everybody knew somehow that they were seeing really the compiled work of all those generations in that bust. It was gorgeous.
Wow.
Yeah, it was gorgeous. So yeah, I again, is that, I don't know, in Europe, there's a lot of that kind of thing. So I don't know if that's talent or just passing on a skill set. I don't really know, but
well, I think the talent comes afterwards. I think the talent comes with all the hard work that goes into it. But you only do that hard work because you love it and you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
And so you have like all that time when you're a kid, just like spending hours and hours drawing. And if you don't enjoy it, then you're not going to be spending that time doing it.
Yeah.
I think that's where the talent starts accumulating.
Sure, that makes sense. Well, I always say that talent is what hard work looks like from the other side.
Yeah.
Right? Wow, you're so talented. It's like you have no idea all of the hours it took, to get to this point where it looks effortless to you.
And also like that's kind of the whole, you're not going to put in those hours unless you're enjoying it.
Yeah, I think that's true.
If you're not enjoying it, even kind of like what we were talking about trauma before, of like the pain of going through something, like it's painful, but you still appreciate it and you kind of love it.
Yeah.
And like when you're kind of beating your head up against something, it sucks, but at the same time you love it because you're like going towards something.
Yeah. I always tell people that you have to love this enough to be bad at it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That there are some things that you try. There are things I've tried. And I'm like, you know what? This is hard and I don't care enough. I'm not enjoying it. Right?
Yeah.
So but now the cool thing is knowing that, because I just go, that's why I can't do that. I don't want to spend the time doing it. If I wanted to spend the time doing it, I guess I could do it. And it makes it easier to let that stuff go, actually.
Yeah.
Like, I can't play a musical instrument. Well, I don't want to practice. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, it's where you put your priorities.
Yeah. I have other things I'd rather do. And I know that.
Yeah.
So, and that might be not doing anything, but I'd rather do that than build up calluses on my fingers trying to figure out how to play this string instrument or whatever.
Yeah.
So you were drawing from an early age, and did you ever consider doing anything else?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, I really want to be a singer. I never wanted to be a drawer. Like,
really?
Yeah, I just was like, that's like my dad's thing. Like, but I'm going to be a famous pop singer.
Okay. All right.
And
there's still time.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to that idea about where your priorities lie. It's just like at one point I had to make the decision because, well, I mean, in high school, I sang all throughout high school, and
oh wow,
I actually wanted to go to the Royal Academy of Music for college, and I auditioned there, and I auditioned,
wow.
And I was very like in my head about like life. So I was like, well, I'm going to go to London and study opera. And that's it. And I only want to go to either the Trinity College of Music, Royal Academy of Music in Birmingham or something. And they're like the top 3 probably in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I was 17, and I get to these auditions, and I'm looking at it, and they're like, well, 4 years younger than most people trying to do this, and because their schooling system is different.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, that's where I want to go to college. I don't want to do anything else. And I didn't get in. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, shoot, I have to do something. Well, I don't want to go back to America, because I was living in Paris. And I was like, I don't want to go back to America yet. I draw, and I have all these drawings that I could put together in a portfolio. And so I put together a portfolio, and I sent it to Parsons School of Design in Paris.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
Because they had a branch in Paris, and I didn't want to leave Paris or I didn't want to leave Europe, because I was like, I still don't speak French well enough, because I'd lived there for 2 years. I was like, I can't go back to America not speaking French well. And so I ended up staying and going to Parsons for 1 year, and realizing, because I was thinking, okay, well, I want to do fashion design, because I loved drawing dresses, girls in these dresses and stuff when I was in high school. Mm-hmm. And then when I was there, I realized, actually, I don't care so much about the clothes. It's more about like the people underneath the clothes.
Uh-huh.
And so then I started thinking more about illustration, and I realized, well, I don't know if this is the right school for illustration and like getting the basic drawing skills. And so I talked to my dad about it, and he ended up asking one of his coworkers in Paris about a good art school in Paris. And he said ESSAD, which is the school that I ended up going to. And so I was like, sure, okay, I'll go. And it turned out it was like this militant art school where they would rip up people's drawings.
Oh, really?
Who did this shit?
Oh, man.
Yeah. Or then they would be like, whoever did this will end up in at the Mickey House drawing Mickeys all day. So anything animation or any
really,
yeah, anything American, they're very like
this sounds very French, like
yeah,
this
very,
yeah,
it was the ultimate French experience. So
it sounds like it.
So I went from going to these American schools in Paris where it was kind of like rosy and it was kind of living the Woody Allen experience of Paris, and gone straight into like, oh God. This really
wow.
But it was amazing, and I made amazing friends, and I ended up it was a 5-year school because you have to do this preparatory year first, and that's where I ended up doing illustration.
I want to stop for a second on this this amazing and horrifying experience, because I think they often go together.
Yeah.
You know, when people are younger, they think, well, this is, but it's strange how they go together.
Oh,
how they often,
such a good point.
you know, where you're like going through something awful and you're like, this is the most, you couldn't imagine a worse thing. And then in hindsight, you're like, that was the coolest thing in the world. And it's really strange how that happens.
Yeah.
But it does.
I think about like some of my best memories ever in my life. I think about coming out of school, like on a Friday night, and it being like bitter, like just so cold, and I'm holding my portfolio case and just walking down Saint Germain to go to a restaurant. Finally, after a week of just like intense working, and just like. And that memory of walking down the street, bitterly cold, and just like trying to get to the restaurant where it's going to be warm, it's the best memories I have. And it's just like, that's so weird. I mean, there were some beautiful moments in Paris of like sitting on the cafes in the springtime. With, like, my favorite memories are the ones that are just like,
It's really an interesting thing, but it's true. Or they're also inconsequential memories, like just weird little things, you know?
Yeah.
It was when my brother died at the eulogy, one of the things I talked about was what came back to me after he died were small moments, not big events, not the thing we did that was huge or the thing he did, but just teeny everyday little things that you take for granted became really precious.
Yeah,
it was surprising to me, but I've noticed that I didn't notice it consciously before that, but I had noticed it before that. But I became conscious of it then, and it's.
And have you noticed that it changes the way that you interact with your daily life?
Yes. Yes. Not all of that is good, because, well, I shouldn't say that. Again, it's all wrapped up together. I pay attention to life as I'm living it in a way that I didn't before. Pay attention to people differently. Because it's a strange thing when somebody is a constant in your life and then they're not there anymore. It's a very human experience. Everybody, you live long enough, everybody has that experience. It's nothing unusual, but it feels completely unusual, like it's never happened to anybody before. And at least in our culture, we ignore the possibility of death most of the time and don't deal with it. And so it comes as a shock every single time. And so I'm more aware that whenever I see somebody, maybe I won't see them again. That's bad because that's always in the back of my head, but it's also good because I'm paying attention in a very specific way. Yeah. And I had a friend who was older. He was 80 when I met him, and in his 90s when he died. And he also taught me that, because when I met him, he was already in his 80s, and I thought, well, I don't know how long I'm going to know this person. And so I paid very close attention every time I got to spend a moment with him. So, that was before my brother died. So, maybe I was practiced in it there a little bit, but that I see changed. And so there's some good things about that. And also I think as a creative person, it makes you more human when you experience things that every other human experiences. Does that make sense? I felt like, I remember after my dad died, and I was talking to a friend whose dad died a little while after, like 6 months or something afterwards. And we were talking about it. And both of us said the same thing, that it made you feel like you were in a big, you wouldn't want to be in this club, but in a big club of people who understand that feeling. And that it was the universal, basically, or mostly universal human experience that happened, and that you have to deal with it and move on and move through it. And I think it probably made me a better writer, a better storyteller, because I connected differently to those experiences. It's like, I was just talking about this, but I had a friend, when he was going through his divorce, he said, it's interesting because when you say to people, oh, I'm getting a divorce, he said that people who haven't been through it say, oh, that's too bad. People who have been through it say, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, there was a difference. And I think that certain human experiences give you a depth that you couldn't otherwise get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That joy in the pain comes from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Realizing like you're starting to really live like the depth of the human experience.
And so what is it that you learned art-wise? And also, did you have a different experience than most people, I would say, or many people I knew who, when they were in art school? Did you feel like you had a head start, or did you feel like you had a lot of stuff you had to unlearn, or did you feel, how did you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I thought that I had a head start, like, really.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I get into the school and they just like beat that out of me.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I've been drawing since I was 18 months, and they're like, no. Actually, why they made us all do a preparation year, no matter like how like
sure
schooling you had done,
like a foundation year kind of.
Yeah, and because they wanted to just beat out anything that you had learned.
Mm-hmm.
And so growing up with an animator dad, you learn to draw in like these big simple shapes in order to kind of get through, in order to get to the emotion of the pose really easily.
Right.
And so you kind of like use these kind of predetermined shapes in your head. And it's great for emoting and like figuring out like how to like pose and like think and like feel with the character. But what they were teaching at that school was observation.
Okay.
And really looking very closely at what are those shapes that you're looking at. And so I had to really kind of put that back in my mind and just like kind of take that out and one of the teachers told me, and she was great. She was really great, Colette. And she came to me and she said, I know that you've been drawing for a very long time. But you need to understand that you have to start looking at what you're drawing in a different way, and not use these premeditated ideas about what you're seeing, but really look at what you're seeing and draw it. One of the first lessons that they had us do in that class was we were just sitting at our desks, and nobody had iPhones at that time. And they said, okay, I want you guys to draw an elephant. And so you try to draw an elephant, and you're like, ugh. There's a trunk, and they really illustrated in that moment how much you really don't know about the things that you think that you know.
Yeah, an illustrator friend said to me one time exactly that. He said, he goes, you know what a fire hydrant looks like, right? I said, yeah. He goes, you know, right? He says, until you try to draw one, then you have no idea. You're like, does it have, where are the bolts and how does it,
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's, it's, I think we have a fuzzy idea of what an elephant is, and that's fine. Again, until you need to illustrate it, and then it's a different thing. Like you have no idea how it works or what it's. Yeah. Anyway, that's one of the things you learned there was how to see.
That was the main thing for the drawing part, and then throughout the years after that, it actually wasn't a school for illustration. They didn't place very much importance on illustration, actually. They were really training people to be art directors for magazines.
Really?
And so they had a lot of, they were placing a lot of importance on typography and photography. And so I went through, and you couldn't choose your classes, so you just went through all of it together. And so that was interesting because I would have never chosen typography. I didn't even know what it was. So typography is really like the design of fonts and how they're placed on a page. And I would have never thought about that stuff. And I'm really glad that I had done that because I really think about it a lot as I'm illustrating my books now. Where I'm going to place the text, what type of text I'm going to use, and when I draw my fonts, I'm conscious of it. I mean, I was awful. I was awful at school in typography. I was like the worst. Like there were lots of tears.
Sure.
But now I understand it.
But that's all really good. This is, I think, it might be in Steve Martin's book. It's somewhere. Steve Martin talks about this when he was first starting to sort of get famous, and he was on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And just before a commercial break or something, Johnny Carson made a joke, and then he did a Donald Duck voice. He could do a really good Donald Duck impression, so he did it. Then during the commercial break, they went to commercial. During the commercial break, he leans over to Steve Martin and he says, you'll use everything you've ever learned. In this business, you'll use everything you've ever learned. So that was just something he knew how to do, and he could pull it out when he needed it. And I found that to be true across the board. If you do any kind, maybe it's true outside of creative work. Luckily, I haven't done much of that. But when you're not doing, when you are doing creative work, it's amazing what you can bring in that will help you, even if it seems at first unrelated.
Yeah.
Right. It teaches you how to sometimes see differently, process information differently. If you, I don't know how long I've been taking pictures now, but I took pictures as a kid. I wanted to take a film class in 7th grade, 8th grade, and they required that you take a photography class, and I didn't want to do that because they weren't pictures that moved, and I only cared about things that moved. Although I was fascinated by photography, and I would look at old Life magazines and the photography and the composition and all of that. I just didn't do it. Then, in order to relax several years ago now, I don't know, maybe it could be a decade or something, I decided that I was going to take up photography. And what was it? Because I thought, I was directing a commercial one time, and this producer kept questioning all my camera placements. And because he was questioning them, I started to question them. And so I thought, you know what? I'm just going to take pictures and concentrate on light and composition so that if I'm in a position where I'm directing again, I will know that that's the place. And I will know why that's the place. And I want it to be an automatic process. I don't want to have to think about it. I want to be able to think on my feet. So that was one of the reasons that I started taking pictures. And what I found was I started to see differently. After a while, I started to see differently, period. I see pictures all the time I don't take. Oh, look at the way the light's doing this. And I started to observe differently. And that bleeds into my other aspects of creativity in ways that I can't quite define, but I know it impacts them. And I think that what I have found when I'm dealing with a younger person or a less experienced person, they have a hard time doing anything that is not directly related to the thing they want to do.
Yeah.
You know, and they think that, well, that's a waste of time. I want to do this thing. And, but it's interesting to hear you talk about typography, because I'm sure you probably, in fact, there was a comic book artist, again, at the San Diego Comic-Con, and he was kind of known for these pinups that he would do and these covers that he would do. And I heard him talking to somebody, a fan once, and he showed them. He goes, I use letters to compose my figures. He says, they're already really nicely designed, a letter. He goes, and so he would he'd show a cover and somebody would be posed in a certain way, and he'd say, see, this is a K. And he would, this is an R. And so he was thinking about letters that way. And he made these really dynamic covers for comics.
Letters have to be very clear.
Right. Really striking silhouettes. And he's like, no, just use letters. That was his advice to this younger person. Right. So sometimes people don't understand that it doesn't have to be directly related. And sometimes they can seem like they're not related at all and still inform each other. It's a really interesting thing that I wish it was easier to explain to somebody who's younger. That you don't waste any time.
It's difficult to get into it. I mean, it's kind of going back to that enjoyment piece of like, if you're not enjoying it, how do you know if you're supposed to be doing it?
Right, right.
Maybe the question really isn't that one. It's really about how do you find the enjoyment in doing the thing that you really want to do. I feel like that's been the question that I'm kind of faced with throughout my whole life, and I'm starting to really kind of appreciate that question in a big way and see that there's so much transformation in that, in learning how to appreciate what I wasn't able to appreciate.
As you get older, the sad thing is you say, boy, I wish I had known. And then you see somebody younger and you basically say, I'm from the future. Right. Right. You're going to want to pay attention to this. Yeah. And your past self says, I don't think I need to listen to that. It's like, no, really invest in Microsoft. I'm telling you. It's like, I've never heard of it. It's like, don't worry. You know, it's a really hard thing to see that, but I don't know. Maybe it's just a symptom of age that you don't understand when you're young. It's a symptom of youth that you don't understand.
And I think that that's kind of the whole part of learning how important it is understanding and seeing like, oh, having that realization like, oh, I didn't get that before. Now I'm starting to get it. And then that can seep into your current life and say like, well, what is it that I'm not getting now?
Right.
Like every phase that we go through, even if we look back and like, that was the stupidest decision I kept making, you have to go through those phases. And so to have some sort of compassion for yourself or for younger people who are still in that phase of like, I just want to draw monkeys. And,
right.
I don't want to draw anything else. And it's just like, okay, then you're in your monkey phase.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I here's the strategy I figured out. So when my niece was young, I would say to her, I would have advice for her, and I would say, she's too young for this advice. So I would stop her and I would look her in the eye and I would say, I'm not talking to you right now. I'm talking to the 30-year-old version of you. Remember this. And she would remember it. She's really good at that kind of thing. She would remember it. So eventually, I hope when she's 30, some of that stuff will come back. It's like, Brian told me this. Like, yeah. So I knew she couldn't handle it, but I'm like, well, I have to tell it to her. Who knows if I'm going to be around? So I'm going to tell her now, and she can hold on to it until she needs it.
Yeah, I think that those things like that you're not ready to hear, like you get what you need at that time, even though you don't fully understand it as a 30-year-old. You understand it in this way, in a different way, and those things ultimately lead up to one day understanding it in the 30-year-old way. Yeah.
I got a letter from a fan yesterday, and he was asking a question about something, and I said, oh, okay. So to answer your question, and I answered the question, I said, you should watch the movie City Slickers with this in mind. And then he said, well, I've seen City Slickers. This happens a lot. I'm like, yeah, I understand that. It doesn't matter. I said, watch it with this in mind. Now you have a different set of eyes. Watch it through this prism now. And I've noticed that even as people get older, they have a younger version of themselves, and sometimes they behave like the younger version of, like, no, but you're an older, wiser person now, right? Now go look at it and see what you see. Actually, I've noticed it's really hard to get people to revisit things they think they've dealt with. Yeah. Like, no, go revisit that and see what that's like now. Like, if you were in a typography class right now,
yeah,
it would feel different.
I really think so.
Yeah, how could it not, right? You have a whole, a bunch of years between then and now where you can say, oh, no, this is really useful, and it'll be useful in ways I can't predict.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you didn't know you were going to do children's books, right? Did you?
But, I mean, it wasn't that far off of, like, where my direction was. But I don't think that I really fully understood how it would affect how I might decide to draw something.
Right.
But going back to the typography thing, I have to say that, so there was this teacher that was awful.
Uh-huh.
She was doing Swiss typography, and the way that she taught was just like, you guys all suck. You're all doing it wrong. God, don't you understand? And she gets so frustrated that nobody understood. And so I just saw like typography as like the boring, driest thing that somebody could do. And then we got another teacher who took us to an exhibition, this typography exhibition, and there was these posters from this guy from Cal Arts. His name is Michael Worthington. In French they say Worthington. But in Michael Worthington, who is a teacher at Cal Arts, actually. And he had his stuff exhibited at this exhibition. And it was the first time I saw like handwritten type, and it just like the joy was there. It was just like, oh my gosh, this is so much fun. I never knew that this whole category of an art could actually be fun, because clearly this guy is having a blast doing it. And it was just like, oh, there's a different way to approach this thing. And I don't know. I guess that kind of is kind of stuck with me too. It's just like that enjoyment piece. Like,
Sure.
there's two ways of doing things. There's like the browbeating and like, you're awful at this, awful. Or
Yeah.
there's like the curiosity and like letting yourself kind of play in this space, and it will bring much broader results.
How do you think? It sounds like that was that experience was. It has broader implications about how you think and how you approach things. Is that true? Do you come away from an experience like that saying, "I know this doesn't seem like fun now, but maybe I can find the fun in it," or like if you have an assignment. There's an interesting thing when you're doing art to order. You know what I mean? What I mean is, somebody asked me to write these books, and so I'm like, okay. But before that, I wrote books and looked for publishers. Now they're saying, "Hey, here's some money, write a book." And I was like, "What? Huh?" Right. Yeah. So now I have to find a way to get into that space to generate, like for some reason, I had this fantasy that, I'd write a screenplay and they'd go great, and, or I'd write this and they'd go great, and it would go. I didn't think about sometimes it's just an assignment, right?
Yeah.
Just an assignment. And you have to treat it the same way you would treat the thing you would do for yourself.
Yeah.
And you have to find a way into the material sometimes.
Yeah. Or else it's just painful and boring and dry.
Yeah. So you have to find a way in. And are there, I guess the typography thing kind of reminded me of like you could do it this way. Like, how do you, when you have an assignment, how do you find your way into that assignment?
Well, I kind of, my first thing is say it's a manuscript that comes my way, and I'm asked to illustrate it. The first thing I do is read the manuscript and try to imagine the parts, the images that come to mind that I'm kind of excited about.
Okay.
And then every single time there's going to be like, oh no, in my head, no, it has to be this way. Yeah. And just get it. Like that, that kind of hard, judgmental part of me needs to like take the back seat and just be like, no, right now I'm just figuring out what is it that's calling to me and that I really am kind of excited about drawing. And maybe that will change. Maybe sometimes I'm like really excited about drawing some super cliche thing. And once I get into it, I realize, oh, actually it feels cliche. And then I can use some of that like judgmental part of me to kind of be like, oh, well, maybe you want to try it this way because the character is thinking this and stuff like that. So I feel like in the very beginning, I really do just kind of let myself sink into what it is that's like calling to me. Because that's the only way that I'll get to the point where I can listen to the judgmental piece of me and kind of flow. Because otherwise, if it's all just the judgmental, like, oh no, the character has to be like front and center and doing this and that, blah, blah, blah. Then I'm gonna be like, oh, that's so boring and all that. And so then I just start getting really like bored with the project, and I'll probably start procrastinating on it. Then it's no fun.
Right.
But if I can just like let myself really find in my mind the images that kind of seem like fun to draw, then I can get to the point where I can invite back in that like critical part.
Mm-hmm.
Like it would have been nice in my typography experience had I had that teacher first who brought us to the exhibition, to have him be there to in the beginning to kind of like show us all that this could be, and then have the awful teacher come in afterwards. and then she could kind of like show us the rules.
You know what? I wonder about that. There was an appreciation you had that maybe you had partially because you had this harsher experience, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I
You
would
know,
the Michael Worthington stuff with such like awe.
right. Yeah. You know, so maybe it worked out the way it was supposed to,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And also everything works out exactly the way it's supposed to work out. So
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, you mean it doesn't have to, okay, right. You know, it could be this, you know, so you had a comparison, you know, that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So maybe that's the way, I don't know. So I'm curious about how much, you know, when you're a creative person, you bring yourself to a project, even if it's an assignment, right? If they've done their work in hiring you, they hire you because you do what you do, right? You know, unfortunately, they don't always do that. They want you to be somebody else. And you're like, I'm not someone else. You should have hired someone else. But if they do their jobs, then they cast you essentially. But it's still an assignment. And what I have found often is like when I'm doing comics, it hasn't happened for a while, but an artist will decide, I want to do this instead of that. And it has an impact on the story. They don't think about that because they want to draw monkeys, like you said, right? And it's like, well, okay, but you drew monkeys and now I have to change my story because you drew monkeys. But there's a balance, right? There's a yes, bring yourself to the table, but also do the job. How do you find that balance?
I think it really is integrating those two sides of your psyche of just like, okay, this is the creative part of like what I want to do. And
Right.
this is what's being asked of me. Where do those two actually start having a conversation rather than just a fight?
Right.
And so, and what I've noticed so much, especially in illustration, is that there's always a middle ground. There's always, and it doesn't, those two sides actually help each other in most cases. Like a lot of times I'll get a note, or maybe there will be a pre-existing art note, and I'm like, oh, that sucks. I don't want to do that. I just want to do this. But then I'm like forced to like interact with the person who wrote the note or something, and so I'm like, okay, I can't just be like, that sucks.
Yeah.
And so I have to like take a step back and like compose my email, and then really thinking about it, like then those things I realize, oh well, maybe if I put that note and kind of like helped make my idea better, maybe actually my idea was that person's idea, and actually we're saying the same thing. Right. And there's like this magical thing that happens when those two sides can kind of start interacting, rather than being oppositional.
Sure. You have an amazing range. Like it's amazing what you're able to do. If you just have stuff that almost looks like it wasn't from the same person.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Like, so I'm like, how can anybody say that I have a style? Because I don't really.
No, you don't. And I mean, or you have several styles. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. But there's an interesting, how is that happening that you have so much range? Most people they do what they do. But you can be, even in the stuff I've seen, the stuff you did for Rapunzel, for Tangled, there's vastly different kinds of art that you did for that, right? Art for the movie itself is the one thing, but the pre-viz stuff and the visual development stuff that you did, a lot of that is very different, very painted and illustrative, and and then other stuff, the stuff that Rapunzel actually paints on her walls is flat and graphic, and so even within that one world, you were doing vastly different things. And so where does that come from? Why are you able to do that? How does that happen? Where does that come from? Do you know?
I do know. It's about what's being asked of me. And it is really that conversation between those two parts of me. I feel like every story has a style, or every assignment has a specific style that I kind of want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Or like for Tangled in particular, what you're talking about was like these Rembrandt inspired pieces that I was doing.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
Thank you. And I was really inspired by Rembrandt, and they had been talking about wanting to have like a lot of stuff in shadows, and just Rembrandt felt like, oh, that makes sense. And it just really called to me, and I really wanted to see what the characters would look like in that style. And so I set out to figure that out, like try to see like, oh, what if this movie actually looked like a Rembrandt painting? And so I kind of like gave myself that assignment. And maybe the producers were like, we really just wanted a dress design. Like, and so I was kind of like in that world. And then at the same time, like my dad kept saying, he's like, I really want you to work on Rapunzel's mural paintings. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And he's like, and I want them to be, he was really inspired by Chagall. I look at the Chagall stuff and I'm like, I don't get it. Like, it just felt, it felt like a kid's drawing. And I was just like, I couldn't find the enjoyment in it.
Mm-hmm.
But the more I looked at it, I just kind of went through it and started then realizing that there was like this airiness to it. Like the characters had like these poses that were really dreamlike. And that was what I was like, oh, I love that dreamlike feel. And I get that part of the inspiration that my dad was trying to get. And he kept talking about like lots of color, and I'm like, oh, that just sounds so garish. Just everywhere. And at the same time, I was really into Charlie Harper, and just loving how he would do like these like interlocking shapes and stuff.
There's a lot of birds and things like that, right?
Yeah. Biology books.
Yeah.
The drawings were kind of interconnected. I loved those. And so I just kind of started one by one, like kind of putting all of those inspirations together and realizing, oh, I can do like a wall full of color, but maybe I can do it so that it like is like a gradation of color, so that it's not like super garish, but you still get all that color. That it's not like blue next to red, like that, but it's more kind of, it was also supposed to be in the background of many of the shots.
Right.
And so then I chose poses that felt like Chagall poses, and like kind of dreamy, like, and chose shapes that felt like Charlie Harper kind of graphic shapes, and then the color, I just kind of like had this gradation, kind of rainbow type feeling in mind, that went throughout the shapes. So it was kind of like trying to answer all of those like different inspirations, kind of created this own style that has nothing to do with Rembrandt stuff. But
right.
it answered that need that my dad was asking for. And
right.
Rembrandt stuff answered the other need of wanting to see what it would look like as a Rembrandt painting.
Sure. It sounds like you are allowing, and this is a thing I see the opposite often. You are allowing the material to dictate what you do,
Yeah.
right? You're allowing the material to drive instead of imposing something on it.
Yeah.
Right? Even to say, well, it's going to be in the background of a lot of shots. Now you're thinking about
The practicality
of it, right? So often I find that people will create in a vacuum. They will do a thing because they like the way that thing is without thinking about the bigger picture and how it's going to fit into the rest of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so they often think that the criticism, if you give them criticism, is about the thing itself rather than how it fits into the whole. I find, for instance, when I was working with university students, I found that they all drew the same way, essentially. They were all inspired by anime and manga, and they wouldn't venture outside. Like there's other artists out there and they wouldn't. I try to steer them in this direction or that one, and they were not interested in those other influences, and so they all sort of drew the same way, and they would impose that style on everything instead of letting the thing itself define what the style should be. And I find that that's a really hard thing to teach people, to not impose your thing on it, but to let yourself come out of the material, find the you in it and bring it out.
Yeah, well, it's not easy because it really does kind of go back to that enjoyment piece. It's like, well, how do you force yourself to enjoy something that you don't enjoy?
Right.
Or that you've convinced yourself that you don't enjoy? Because that was the other thing. It's like with the Chagall stuff, I had convinced myself that I wasn't into it.
Right.
Same with Matisse and same with Picasso. Like, it's a ton of artists like that. Like over the years, I thought I didn't like something and now I like it. And just, I guess, I don't know how you convince somebody to do that, but I do think that it comes with maturity. Maybe trusting that like we were saying earlier, that we all go through the phases that are necessary at that moment until we learn our lessons for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I talked to Frank Oz about these processes, and we have this ongoing thing about. I say he starts with a blank page. Now I'm speaking specifically of the puppeteering stuff. I'm not his directing stuff or his acting, but I say you start with a blank page, and it's like, no, I don't. There's a puppet, there's a thing, and I'm like, yeah, but if I pick up a puppet, it doesn't become Cookie Monster, it doesn't become Bert or Yoda or whatever. And he talked about the creation of Bert, and he said, well, Bert is a boring puppet. He's like, Ernie's got hands, Bert's got little rods and stuff, and he's a boring puppet. And he didn't know what to do with it. And then he realized, well, what if I make him the most boring person?
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, so his favorite color is gray. And, he's just the most boring person. And that's how, so Bert comes completely out of, he's a boring puppet, I'll go with it, instead of how do I make this puppet more interesting?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so cool.
Isn't it?
If you were to try to, then you try to fight against it, then it doesn't work. It's difficult, and then it doesn't work even more. Like,
Right. But if you just go, this is what it is, I'll just do this. And then you come up with Bert, who is kind of an amazing character. And when you know the creation of that character on how he, like, the challenge was, this is boring, how do I make it interesting? And then to go, no, I'm just going to go with it. Like, that's a kind of bravery, too, that I don't think a lot of people would have.
That truly is, like, the essence, like, the whole point of creativity. Like, the creative spirit is in that, in being able to adapt.
Yeah.
Without that, you're not being creative. You're just on autopilot.
I think that's true. I think that the word creativity is a problem. Creativity, in a way, is like it's being open. It doesn't usually come. Sometimes it's like an antenna, or it's like a, when you're doing it right, it doesn't seem to be coming from you. You know that feeling I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Where it seems to be coming from someplace else. And it's because you're just open to whatever this thing wants to be.
Yeah.
And it sort of tells you what it wants to be. And that's sort of at the height of creativity. You don't feel like you're creating.
Yeah.
And it's actually when you're struggling, is when you're being creative. That's actually harder.
Yeah.
And it seems like you're pulling teeth, but when you just open yourself to listen to what this thing wants to be and just get out of the way.
That loudly. And so you have to kind of dig for it. Sometimes creativity is a little bit of a dig and hard work.
That's true.
I've been thinking about creativity just as a life force.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I did this little cartoon about this little tomato plant with its roots searching for water. It was based off this tomato plant that I saw on the freeway on my way to work like 10 years ago. And every day I would see this little plant growing and growing, and it just like right in the middle of the freeway, like on the side. There was no water around. Every day it would get bigger and bigger, and then these little tomatoes were there, and they grew into like full-on tomatoes.
Uh-huh.
That is just amazing and so ingenious that just naturally, like a tomato plant does not have like cognitive function that we know of.
Right.
But it just naturally knows how to search for water and to grow. And so it goes down, doesn't find water there, so it starts creating a route to go somewhere else and look for water there. And the whole thing, and so it creates this structure of roots that end up finding water. But for me, that is the creative process. Like that it like totally encapsulates the creative process, and that you're searching for something, it doesn't work over here, so that's why you go over there. And it's ingenuity and perseverance, and all of that is inside of us as a creative living being.
That's great. That's a great way to think of it. That's a really great way to think of it. I think that's really insightful.
I actually like the word creative because it really does use that word create. And when I think about humanity, that we've been creating.
You've changed my mind. you have changed my mind. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense to me. That's great. So when you are talking to people who are just starting or interested, beginning their careers and asking you questions, first of all, what are the kinds of questions you get? I get very specific kinds of questions.
Yeah, me too.
So what are the questions that you get? And what are the, you sound a little bit more forgiving than I am in a lot of ways, because you'll be like, well, that's the stage they're in. And I more like your French typography teacher. So, what are the pitfalls or mistakes you see people maybe falling into on a regular basis? I see those kinds of things. So, those were a lot of questions, but you get the general idea. So what are the kinds of things that people ask you when they're starting?
Well, the question that I get a lot that surprises me is, how do I find my style? Oh,
right.
Not me, but like how does one find their style?
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that it's such a recurring question for people.
It is. I know that question. Yeah.
And it's kind of a frustrating answer because, but also I think a very positive and uplifting one. But it's frustrating because it's not obvious to them already that they feel like they need to have a specific style that is external of them.
Right.
To achieve something, rather than just letting themselves come through in what they're doing. But then at the same time, like very practically speaking, there are times when you have to do a specific style and you have to figure that out.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But that's not generally what the question is. The question is usually about how do I find my style? And I guess that is a valid question because if you feel like you haven't found your style, it's probably because you've been getting in the way of finding your style. You haven't been been letting yourself enjoy what you're doing. When I started out, I had that same question also. I questioned that all the time because I saw myself doing all these I'd put together my portfolio and I'd see like the Rembrandt pieces and then like some Charlie Harper inspired stuff and like, ugh. Like, it looks like 4 different people did this. And I didn't see it as a quality.
Right.
But then I'd be really kind of intrigued when people would be like, I saw that thing online and I knew instantly that it was yours. And they're like, how could you know that? Like, and then talking with people, then I realized, oh, there's like some sort of something about me that's coming through all of these different techniques that I'm using.
Mm-hmm.
And the technique that you're using really doesn't matter. That as long as you yourself are enjoying what you're doing and really living it, your uniqueness will come through, no matter what the technique is.
There are a couple of interesting definitions of style. So my friend August Wilson said, style is nothing except keeping the same idea from the beginning to the end, which I thought is a really interesting definition of style.
Yeah.
Because that means it can change, right? According to what you're doing, right? But you are keeping the same idea from the beginning to the end. And to find your own style, it's about knowing, I think, who you are, or at least trying to discover who you are. It's about going inside, not going outside often.
Yeah.
Again, enjoying yourself is part of that, right? Like, who am I?
Yeah.
But the comic book artist, writer, Will Eisner said that style is the thing that emerges as a result of how you solve problems.
Yeah.
Which I find really interesting. And my example of that is there's an artist named Brian Stelfreeze, he's an illustrator who does comics. And he said that when he was younger, he couldn't draw people. He was really good at drawing machinery, but he couldn't draw people. Then he started thinking about people as machinery.
Yeah.
And then he could draw them. If you look at his people, they don't look like machinery.
Yeah.
But they do have a very specific style because that underneath it for him, they're machinery.
Hmm.
And so I have seen that that's one place that style comes from. So there is a way that one artist draws hands to make it that they can do it, and they can't do it the way somebody else does it, or and so that becomes their style. And I remember I had a friend, we were starting off together, and he wanted to be a comic book artist. He works at Pixar now, but he wanted to be a comic book artist, and we were both trying to break in. And I remember he could always draw pretty well, and I remember younger artists looking at his things, or even artists his age, and they would say, "Oh, I really like your style. Your style's amazing." And one day he said, "I have no idea what they're talking about." He said, "I don't see my style. I'm just trying to draw the best way I know how. I'm just, drawing what I see and doing it the best way I know how. I can't see my style." And he said, "When I try to do my style, I can't draw."
Yeah, you become too self-conscious.
Yeah. And so I think there's something about being younger or less experienced where the process part of it, the part that's underneath, is almost impossible to see. So what you can see is the style on top. You don't know there's a cake under there. You're so enamored of the frosting. You're like, well, and you just think it's all frosting. It's like, no, there's a cake under there. And I think it's impossible to see the cake. I tell people all the time to read interviews if they want to be a screenwriter or a director, read interviews with old directors and writers because, first of all, I think they had a different way of thinking about it than people now. But the other thing is, I'm like, don't look at what Hitchcock did. Figure out how Hitchcock thought. If you figure out how he thought, then you can start to think about how he solved problems. And if you, I've used Hitchcock's way of solving problems for stuff that no one would ever think was Hitchcock inspired stuff.
Yeah.
Because I'm taking the theory and applying it differently to solve some other problem. But because I have some idea about how he thought, I can use that and borrow that instead of taking the exact shot from here or there, which I find people often do. Like, I'm inspired by Hitchcock. I stole this shot. Right? Well, that's not the same thing. Why did Hitchcock make that choice?
Yeah.
Then you can start to guess. You're probably going to be wrong. It doesn't matter. You can start to guess, what would Hitchcock do if he were here now? Right? He might make this decision. You might be wrong. But if you're thinking about the problem-solving aspect of it versus the style aspect of it, you're going to get, I think, a better result. So I just think that emphasis on style is just a youthful thing because you don't understand there's a whole cake underneath that frosting.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And also, sometimes it's going through the process of trying to figure out what your style is that you start to realize, you start to understand your process a little better. You're trying out all these different techniques. And you start realizing, well, the running theme in all of this stuff is really how I feel when I'm drawing this. Or, that it's not really about the technique that you're using. You're stealing something from something that you're inspired by. But it's
right.
really about how you're feeling.
And is there a point for you? I remember an interview with Chuck Jones where he talked about this, and he said, he goes, look, I'm to the point now where I can draw pretty much anything I can think of. Like, I can draw now. Like, I've done that. I did all my drawings. Now I can draw. And the first thing you're learning how to do is how to draw. He goes, but now the challenge is what to draw. Right? Right? That's the bigger thing. The best answers are always in the why, not the how.
Yeah.
Why use this style versus that one?
Yeah.
Why use this color? Why draw it this way versus that way? Why is a better question than how. And young people always want to know how.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But why is a much deeper question.
The how you can just Google. Like the how
Yeah.
is, how do I make my oils act a certain way, or like how do I paint with gouache or whatever. All that you can research.
Right.
The why that requires your own personal thinking process.
Yeah. And what are the mistakes you see, or the pitfalls, or the warning signs when you're talking to people, or younger people, or beginners? Are there any pitfalls that you see that are common?
Well, I see a lot of people trying to get into Disney or in animation in general.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
That's not the pitfall, but the pitfall is that their portfolios all look like Disney drawings, or like they're trying to be Disney. Like there's nothing very
No, I know what you mean.
personal or.
A lot of people try to draw like your dad.
Yeah, and a lot of those people are sending portfolios my way or something like that, and I just feel like that's not what is going to be showing off who they are.
Right.
They're like trying to focus on drawing a specific way. That's probably the biggest pitfall that I see.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one is kind of getting bogged down with by an assignment and feeling like, oh, I have to have an environment piece, and it has to be an environment with buildings and trees. I have to show that I can, and all those things are great to be able to show. But when you look at a portfolio, you can feel like this person has forced themselves to do that, rather than let themselves have that that back and forth conversation in their brain between the judgmental and the creative, and just it's when they don't find the enjoyment in it that it really comes through. It's like, okay, well, I've like ticked off all these boxes. I have my character to design.
Right.
And then I've got the environment piece and this, and like, okay, yeah, that's great. Like that's what we need, or that's what people need in visual development is. But you completely lost yourself in it.
Right. Yes. There's a comic book artist named John Byrne, and John Byrne said he used to hate drawing environments. He just he hated it. So he didn't do them, or he would kind of sketch them in. Then he thought, I can't let this beat me, which I've noticed with people who are good, that they are able to spot their weaknesses and they don't run from them. They run towards them and say, well, I got to tackle that because that limits what I can do. Right. And so they'll run right at them. And so he started drawing environments because he forced himself to do it. But then he found out how much he enjoyed it. And he's like, it's one of my favorite things to do now are environments. And what's interesting about that is he uses them in the storytelling.
That way of treating environments, that's how I have been able to get into environments too, is not seeing it as like, I gotta draw these architecture buildings. I mean, for somebody who loves architecture, drawing on that would be an amazing thing. But for me, who really, a lot of times I don't, my way into it is to figure out, well, what does that environment, what is that environment trying to say?
Yeah.
And like what part in this story, what does it mean?
Right.
And how is it going to affect what the overall narrative is going to be? And then that's like interesting to me. And then I get really into it and I can spend hours on it.
Sure. Yeah. I don't like it when somebody says, and maybe you'll change my mind on this too, but I don't like it when people say, the city was like a character in the story, or the sets were like a character in the story. I don't like that. Characters are characters. But what I think they mean to say, what I think they're saying is that it mattered.
Yeah.
Right? That it had something to do with the story. It wasn't just the setting. It mattered. But I think that's what it should do anyway. So, yeah. It's like, there's a great thing in 12 Angry Men where when Sidney Lumet was directing that movie, he had what he called a lens strategy. And so as these men are in this room debating this case, he starts with a wide lens. So the room is full and there's lots of space. As things get more tense throughout the movie, he changes lenses so the room shrinks. So there's less space. You can't notice it, you just feel it, Yeah. But that's an example of, well, he's trying to tell a story here and he wants you to feel a certain way. And that's why it is the way it is, not because he wanted to use this lens or that lens, or he wanted to do this kind of lighting or that kind of lighting. What does the story need? How am I serving it? I just think that often that is the height of, that's where all the good ideas come from, I find, is from the inside, from realizing that Bert's a boring puppet and going with it.
Yeah.
Right? That's where the good ideas seem to come from. It's almost like you have to surrender to the piece. And until you can do that, you're not going to do, I don't think, the best work you can do. And you sound like that's exactly what you do. You surrender to the piece. The piece is this. The piece wants to be this.
When I'm doing something successfully, yes.
Yes.
And I'm not, I bang my head against the wall for a long time.
Yeah. And that banging your head against the wall is that the root process, the rooting, is that what you think that is? Or is that you?
Well, if I'm only banging my head against the wall and I'm not getting anywhere, that is the roots dying, not trying to water and just going against the wall. I'm like, there's water. But it's when I'm actually finding, like, coming up with new ideas and like, this would work. This would work.
Yeah.
That's when like the root thing is going on. That's magical.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, and I just feel like that's what's really cool about story in general, is that that process is so a part of it, is that it kind of winds and it integrates one idea from a previous part of the story, and there's just so much. A good story really kind of just flows.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah. There's Gary Ross, who I think is an amazing writer and director. And Gary Ross, I have an interview with him that it's hard to find, but I have it, and he's talking about kind of the stuff that I teach. So he talks about 3-act structure and he talks about that stuff, but he's like, I don't think about that stuff. Now, if you look at his work, it's so well structured. Like, I just think it's close to being instinctual for him to follow that. So he doesn't pay attention to that. But what he does pay attention to, he said, is connective tissue. How does all of this work together? What is the connective tissue? And that's what he focuses on. And I started going, okay, I got the 3-act structure thing down. I can do that. I'm going to start thinking about the connective tissue.
That's interesting.
And it made my work better. It raised my work up a notch to think of it that way. How does it all connect?
Yeah, that's where it feels magical.
Yeah.
It's just like these two completely unrelated parts just coming together and making sense together.
Right. Yeah. And it is, and the problem is too, it's interesting that you use the word magical, and this is why I think there is a component of alchemy. I always say there's alchemy, that something happens when you have all of the right ingredients in the right proportions. Magic happens. When if there's a story, an old story, and there's somebody casting a spell, they have their recipes. And even for magic, there's a recipe. I got to have this much wolf's bane. I got to have this much eye of newt. I got to have this much whatever. But it's still the right ingredients in the right proportions that make the magic happen. And I think that's true. When Frank Capra said about It's a Wonderful Life, he said, there's more in it than we put in it. I don't know how that happened. Frank Oz said he doesn't know why his characters come alive. He doesn't know how that happens. But I think he does know how it happens. He doesn't want to know. He finds that blocks the process for him. But I think it is all the right ingredients in the right proportions. And he, I know, digs deep into himself in order to, it's like you borrow a piece of your soul and you put it in the thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the magic part. And the only way you do that is to get out of the way and let the thing be what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And then it is magic. I can't explain it, but that's what happens. And there are some people who can do that over and over and over again because they're willing to go to that place. And there are some people who do it once, maybe twice, and can't seem to do it because they get stuck then on the surface and don't go deep enough again. And sometimes it requires, at least in the writing process, that you go very, very deep. Do you feel that same way about the visual component, that sometimes you have to go deep?
Yeah. And I like the projects where I'm required to go deep.
And when you say go deep, what do you mean?
Well,
when I say go deep, how do you interpret that? Well, maybe I should say that.
When you say go deep, I mean, I guess it all just kind of goes back to like what is like connecting all of us as humanity, like what it feels to me, but how that relates to what I've observed in the real world as well. Thinking about Rapunzel and thinking about how I really enjoyed going deep, as you say, in researching how she would spend her day, and how I felt that was it touched me personally, but also it was also an observation of how not just me living my everyday life and interpreting that into Rapunzel, but seeing that other people could relate to it as well, and the observation of life around.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than just seeing it as like, oh, I got to design a style for the murals and a technique that I'm going to put on the walls.
Right.
That sounds so boring. But like once I start thinking about, well, why does she do it this way? And what does she do during the day? And what are the things that really scare her? And those type of things, that's interesting to me. And that's what I think is going deep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, well, again, you just talked about why you said why. You said why again. Why is she doing, I think that, again, that gives you better answers.
Well,
why?
I think that the word why also just opens so many doors because there's never an answer to why.
Right.
I mean,
right. Yeah.
Kids saying, why? And the parent is, it just opens more and more and more possibilities. Whereas how, there's a definite answer to that. And you come to the end and you're done.
Right.
And that's a very practical way of living life.
Right.
But life isn't just all about practicality.
Right. And why can change. You might have one why at one age and another why at a different, why changes. How does it change? Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe with technology it changes, but.
Yeah, I don't even know if that's true. It's funny. I remember having an argument with, and this argument continues, but it's shifted. There was a time when in comic books were in this weird time where nobody was buying them. There had been a big crash and there was a big bubble and then the bubble burst. And nobody was buying comics. And the comics that were being produced were terrible. But people in the industry started blaming technology. They started saying, well, people can play video games and people can do this and they can do that. And kids don't want to read because these other things are more exciting. And I said, things don't change. People want a good story and we're not giving it to them. Give them good stories and they'll come back. Now, you're talking about the technology, blah, 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 blah. Along comes Harry Potter. Kids are reading those books. They're as thick as they can be.
Yeah.
There's not really any illustrations to speak of. There's some spot illustrations, but it's not a comic book.
Yeah.
It's not a video game. You can't interact with it. You can't, it's not a movie. It's a book. And kids were eating it up.
Yeah.
Because they were enjoying the story and the world they were in.
Yeah.
I hear the same thing now. Pre-COVID, people aren't going to the movies anymore because they can stay home and they can watch, this or that. It's like, the movies haven't been that good. Why don't we just cop to that, right? And make better stuff instead of blaming the technology.
Yeah, that's good.
So I think that things don't change as much as we think. And technology in a way blinds us to the way that they are the same.
That's so true. Yeah.
So it's funny, like with TV, when TV showed up, the studios they couldn't, it's like you can sit home and you can watch stuff on your own. Like you don't have to go to the movies. And they thought it would kill the movie business.
Yeah.
And actually, I think Walt Disney was the first person that said, can't we make TV? like we have a back lot and we have costumes. Can't we just make TV? Why are we fighting this?
Yeah.
And so, and he still had a thriving movie business and, it didn't kill the thing, so there's always a new technology and it comes along and we think it's all different and people don't make their peace with it. They fight with it. They try to bend to it. And it always seems to be that people are drawn to the same things over and over again. So nobody stopped going to the movies when TV showed up and nobody, it's like, no, they went to the movies and they watched TV. So they could do both things, but they could coexist. And so I think that I don't pay much attention to technology because I think it's an illusion. And how you make a good story was the same 1,000 years ago as it is right now.
Yeah. Wait, have I talked to you about *Sapiens* yet? Did I ask you if?
Yeah. I started to read it, and then I didn't finish reading it because that's my way. It had nothing. It had nothing to do with the book. Yes, I was reading *Sapiens*, and I think I got about halfway through, and then the part of the problem is I think I was writing, and when I'm writing, I can't read, and I'll stop reading.
Yeah.
And I might not pick that book up again. I think it was something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's a thick book.
Yeah. But, I'll finish it.
You should, because it really, I mean, reading it really reminded me of you and your whole philosophy of like the importance of storytelling for humanity. And because Yuval talks about, in the book, he talks about how he believes that what has really created society has been our ability to gather around stories, myths, which turn into religions, which turn into cultures. And it's from that ability to tell stories that we have become humans. I think that's definitely true. What we are. And throughout all the different technologies that have existed, the one thing that has remained the same is this ability to connect through story.
Yep.
The story that you tell yourself, the story that you tell yourself about the community that you live in, about the country that you're a part of.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, I do believe that. I do think it is, yeah, it's universally human, and there must be a reason for that, right? There's no culture without stories, and there must be a reason for that. Otherwise, some people would have it and some people wouldn't, you know? So yeah, we may express things differently, but stories are strangely universal in that it doesn't matter what culture they're from. If they're very human, you'll connect. It doesn't matter when they're from. If they're human, you'll connect. It doesn't matter what language they're in. A lot of stories that we still tell were written in languages that we don't even speak anymore, that nobody speaks, you know? But the stories remain. I think that's really fascinating. That, and there are even stories, there are even gods that no one worships anymore, and we have those stories, right? Like the stories outlived those gods, right?
That's so interesting. Yeah, it's so true. And because ultimately those gods really had, they played an important role in people's lives.
Yeah.
And that was why they existed, and that's why they continue to exist today. Because of the basic fears and desires that we have as humans.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I'll finish the book. That's my promise to me. That's the Brian McDonald guarantee. So I will finish the book. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that came to mind, or that I maybe rudely interrupted you when you were about to make a point? Is there anything that we're leaving on the table about the creative process, about your process, about what you've learned from other people? Maybe that's a good one. What have you learned from other people about, like, people, you know, here's my problem has been that I've almost always worked in a vacuum, that I rarely have I been in a group where I'm creating. I'm just all by myself creating. And I always envied my friends who were at Disney or who were at Pixar, who were at ILM, because they were surrounded by people like them who had different skill sets, and they could, and everybody, I don't know what this is. I don't know if this was true when you were at Disney. Every artist I know thinks the artist next to them is better. And Like, I suck and they are great. It's this really interesting thing. But what happens is you all have different strengths and weaknesses, and and my friends who write on TV, I've seen this too, where they learn from the older writers, and and I've had to learn all this stuff in a vacuum. What have you learned in environments like that? And maybe it was even in art school, I don't know, from other creative people about how to work or how not to work or how to think or how not to think. Is there anything there?
I would say the thing that I took away the most from working at Disney was just seeing and learning to appreciate that everybody has their own unique way of having a process. Like, everybody has a process that is completely their own. There might be one person that's a lot more into story, kind of like me, or like really into like the why and stuff. But then there's other people who are really much more about the how, and we need that too in specific areas of the process, and just realizing that everybody has their own thing, and comparing myself really just gives way to that like judgmental person in my head that really doesn't help at all. But learning to accept that, oh, I'm different from these people, and that's okay, and that can be celebrated. Yeah, I think that's probably what I learned the most when I was working at Disney, and now today I'm working at DreamWorks right now. So just kind of being reminded of that again. That everybody has their own way of working. And also the COVID Corona thing, like realizing that we're all in this together, and no person, as much as we thought that we were all separated and we could do our thing, and that perhaps we weren't reliant on somebody on the other side of the country or somebody in a different social economic thing from us. Like, we're actually very much connected, and we're like, if one person gets sick, we're all going to get sick, and we have to really be conscious of this, and just kind of having like a new appreciation for, wow, all of our journeys they might be separate, but they're also very much entwined. That's kind of a good thing to remember when you're working on a large project like a movie.
Right. That it's, that you're a piece of a whole. Yeah. I can't thank you enough for doing this. I love talking with you, Brian. I love talking with you. It's one of my favorite things. You're one of my favorite people to talk to on the planet. And I hope that we just talk one day and don't have a show, just talk, because we don't really do that very much. But, I always learn something. You changed my mind about the word creativity. So I really appreciate that. I like to have my mind changed. I think people think I don't, but I actually do, because I'm just in this to learn. And I do feel like I learned something. And I think this will be invaluable to people who want to follow in your footsteps, because I know you have a lot of people that do want to do that. And it's always hard to hear that about yourself. At least it is for me, but it's true. Hear that, and you're like, no, don't follow. Just follow in your own footsteps. No, don't. but they're going to follow that advice then. Right. That's still following in your footsteps, right? And sometimes you need somebody to follow for a while. Yeah. Just say that it's okay to stumble or whatever. Yeah, but I think I'll be that. Sometimes it takes I've told this story before, but there was a guy who played in a band with Miles Davis. And this guy grew up on Miles Davis and then found himself, in Miles Davis's band. And one day he got the courage finally to say to him, when I was a kid, I used to listen to your records and try to play just like you. I try to play the trumpet just like you. And I would listen, I'd play along. And Miles just sort of took it in. And then he said, yeah, sometimes it takes a long time to sound like yourself.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's true. So, understand that you have to sound like yourself eventually, but I think it's okay to try to sound like Miles for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I learn a lot from other people.
Yeah, you do. So, and actually when it's a lot of different people, styles sort of emerge from that too. All of your influences. So going back to the style thing. But anyway, I was trying to sign off and we started another conversation. So anyway, thank you so much, Claire. I hope we talk again soon. I'm glad that your life is doing this and going up, and you went through the bad times, and then of course then the COVID hit. But I'm glad everything seems to be good, and the kids are good, and say hi to your parents. And I hope I talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's nice seeing you, Brian.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. You Are a Storyteller, Masters of the Craft is hosted by Brian McDonald and produced in Seattle, Washington by Belief Agency.